context, you also talked about this at CØSMOS, or I think there's also some other presentations that you did, where you said, you know, you have these different eras in crypto. The first one just being kind of like the proof of concept for Bitcoin and for Ethereum, for these like kind of like big layer ones. And then you had the first version of connectivity between those chains. But now we're entering an era where we actually need and require to have full interoperability. So maybe it would be good to give everyone a brief overview of what interoperability in that context means and what kind of like different degrees there are, because it's kind of like really hard to understand. You know, for example, you have WBTC, right? That's already kind of like, you know, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then you have bridges like Avalanche. They implement a lot of bridges, right? So maybe can you talk a little bit about different concepts of interoperability and where we currently stand?
Yeah, so I think, you know, interoperability by itself is a very overloaded term right now in the ecosystem, even though there is, you know, not that much of it exists yet, I would say, right? Besides kind of within the CØSMOS or kind of a few other projects. So I think here's the way that I think about it if you take a step back, right? So, you know, we have all these different chains that are communicating and running some type of consensus protocol, right? So whenever you're talking about interoperability at the core, you're asking like, how can we connect them together to make information flow easier, asset transfer flow easier, but finally allow really users to interact with all of these ecosystems easier, right? Like right now, it's still a pain. You have to have a wallet on chain A. You see an application on chain B. You've got to go through some, you know, external wallet or external mechanism to move your assets, and then only finally you can use it in the application. Take some, you know, security assumptions along the way. Pay 3 types of transaction fees and gas fees, right? And so it's kind of a nightmare. So whenever we're talking about interoperability, I think there is kind of at first there is just a protocol interoperability, right? So meaning that, you know, you have a chain A, you have a chain B. How do you just pass messages from one chain to another, right? And the message in this case could be really anything, right? So it could be an asset transfer message, it could be NFT transfer, right? It could be information retrieval from one chain to another, or it could be like a smart contract call that you want to differentiate to. But at the very core of it, you first have to define like what is this connected tissue, right, across these ecosystems. And you know, IBC is a good example of connected tissue that works quite well, you know, within the CØSMOS ecosystem, right, between kind of Tendermint chains right now that serve live. The protocol is kind of agnostic to what it is that you're trying to pass along. So that's the first thing. You have to define how you're going to connect these ecosystems, like different consensus mechanisms and so on and so forth. From there, you have to ask ourselves the question, well, okay, now that we can pass messages, we have to understand like what are the different types of application level messages that we're interested in passing to serve different use cases, right? So if we're talking about, let's say, a DEX, then a DEX interacts with assets, and you need to be able to swap one asset for another. So if you want users to be able to use assets from outside of the ecosystem where the DEX was built, you have to pass, you know, an asset in one shape or form, represented on the destination chain somehow, such that it can be used in these DEXs, right? So, you know, on top of this interoperability protocol, then you're talking about what is my kind of token transfer format, right? Am I passing, you know, ERC20 equivalent of the token? Am I going to represent it as, you know, NFT and so on and so forth? But that relies on, again, like the lower layer, just basic interoperability protocol, which includes, you know, taking a message, relaying it, finalizing it, and making sure it is safely delivered from one chain to another. Okay, so then you have this application level use cases. And finally, you have to ask yourself, well, how do applications then interact with these protocols underneath it, right? Because applications need if you're a builder on an application, you need a simple API, right, that just sort of connects your ecosystem with a bunch of other, you know, ecosystems, and, you know, you don't want to think about the layers below it, right? And so then there's a third layer of interoperability, which right now it does not exist, I would say, at all. It's an API layer for the application builders that can be exposed that makes it easier for them to connect with 20, 30, 100 different ecosystems, so that they can expose the users of those ecosystems to their application. Right? And right now, I think those layers are, I would say, not defined, and I think a couple projects are doing it by building their own things, but as a layer, we still have a lot of work to do there. So that's on a high level how I would define just interoperability. It's bottom layer, message passings, application level protocols, and it's APIs that make it easier for the applications to be multi-chain enabled.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing these days are potentially just short-term kind of like solutions, right? I think, like I just mentioned, Wrap Bitcoin is one thing that implements a centralized custodian between,
Right.
which has a lot of counterparty risk. And then you have something like IBC that, at least for tenement-based chains, makes it easy to seamlessly transfer everything between each other. So can you